It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the FinSide. It ain't the left side.
Thank you, Solo D. Welcome to another episode of On the FinSide here with Kat and Paul. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and on Spotify. Check out my Twitter page, Brian Cat NFL, as well as Paul's Fanatic with a PH. That's PHINATIC_pick on Twitter as well. So here we are, a few days into training camp now, adding on to this 53-man roster, going through position by position. And we really do that for a reason, because if you take a look at a couple of players Paul and I had on the team making the 53, center Ryan Anderson and Jaron Elliott were actually cut here before the beginning of training camp. So we're going to wait a little bit to get into the 53-man roster prediction in totality, but we are going to predict who we expect to make it at defensive back right here. So, Paul, taking a look at this unit, we did save the best for last because it looks like this might be the best position group on the team. And you could actually make the case that 4 of the 5 best players are at this position, with Xavier Howard, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Bobby McCain, and Rashad Jones.
Oh, completely. I mean, it's and I love the fact that thus far in training camp, they're doing something that you and I talked a lot about in the off season, which is deploying a lot more of those nickel and dime looks as they move forward here. I know we touched on it a little bit in our front 7 show. I know it's something that we've been looking at a lot, and they're doing some of the things that we've been screaming about for years. Like they're playing Rashad Jones and TJ McDonald up at, strong side linebacker in some of the looks. So you really don't know what this defense is doing because of the way they're flexing their secondary around.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing at the strong safety position, Rashad Jones being the starter, but TJ McDonald out on the field now that he's back from PUP, showing a lot of those big three safety looks, also coming down into the linebacker position too. So that's going to alleviate some of the need at linebacker, and then the linebackers are going to blitz a little bit more, as it seems. That's going to alleviate the need for a big edge rusher, even though the Dolphins are pretty weak in that department. So yeah, taking a look at what Chris Perkins from The Athletic said here, and it's music to both of our ears. Miami quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick saw it throughout OTAs and minicamp, and he saw it again during Thursday's first practice of training camp. The Dolphins secondary is playing much differently this year under Coach Brian Flores. So far, there are definitely more dime packages under Flores, a scheme Miami hasn't employed much in the last few years. And it seems though there are even more nickel packages with the 5 defensive backs. So certainly what we're looking for there. And the Dolphins certainly have the stars at the top with the 4 guys that we mentioned. Now it's really just a matter of them filling out the rest of that depth chart, because if you're weak at the 5th, 6th, 7th defensive back spot, Tom Brady's going to pick you apart like we saw last year when he targeted Torrey McTyer repeatedly.
Yeah, and one cool thing to me, too, is because of the way that they're basically keeping Xavier Howard and Eric Rowe as the starters on the outside, and then flexing Bobby and Minkah into some different roles, flexing Rashad and TJ into some different roles, they're able to give you so many different looks with the same personnel packages while keeping some of their best players on the field and finding the roles to do so. That's going to set opposing offenses up so they don't truly know what the defense is doing, even if they've got their dime package personnel out on the field, because you could have Minkah in the slot, Bobby at free safety, Rashad at strong safety, and TJ up at strong side linebacker, or you could have them back there in a dime look, and you don't know what's coming, which makes it difficult for opposing offenses to plan based on the personnel and sub packages.
And that's really the strategy here, and a big difference from what we've seen over the last decade, when so many of the defensive backs played in a very zone-based coverage instead of the man-to-man we expect to see here this year. So, yeah, Eric Rowe, word out of camp from the Dolphins beat writers, as well as from the 3 yards per carry guys, as well as the Locked On Dolphins and Travis Wingfield, is that Eric Rowe has been very up and down so far here in camp. It would be a huge complement to the rest of the depth if Eric Rowe actually ended up not making this roster. I still think he will because of the veteran experience. He is 6'1", 200 pounds, former second-round pick, has experience in this defense. But also, he's a guy who hasn't played very well in the NFL so far. So my question to you, Paul, is taking a look at Minkah, I believe that when 5 defensive backs are out on the field, Minkah's going to be in that nickel role. It's the same position he played at Alabama. You're going to see Bobby McCain full-time at free safety, it appears. But when the Dolphins do go to 4 defensive backs, do you see Minkah kicking back to that cornerback spot opposite Howard?
I see Minkah kicking there, or I see Minkah kicking a free safety and Bobby kicking out there. It's very much a scenario where ideally I would love to see one of these other young guys step up to be that boundary corner so they can keep flexing Bobby, TJ, Rashad, and Minkah around the middle of the defense where they can. But again, I could see a scenario where Bobby kicks to the outside and Minkah slides to free safety. I'm okay with either scenario, even though I think Minkah's a little bit better on the boundary than Bobby.
I would be okay with either scenario too. If you ask Bobby McCain, though, he has said to the media, "I am a full-time free safety now." But based on the versatility of this defense, we'll see if that changes. And Bobby McCain is the one player on this defense who is actually not just the one player. We've got several of them. You've got Xavier, you've got Rashad Jones, you got Minkah. But Bobby McCain, it's going to be interesting to see if he can stay back there at that center field free safety position, play with the ball over his head, and get a lot of interceptions this year. Because my only concern about McCain at that free safety spot is he's not a very good tackler, and he's going to be that last line of defense.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll add to that, too, is Bobby can say what he wants. There's only one person that's full-time in one spot all the time, and that's going to be Xavier Howard. Anybody else, if they only play one role, is a part-time player. And I think Bobby's going to be on the field too much to be defined into one little box this year.
What I like is that, we've talked about this 3-3-5 defense because that's really what the Dolphins are going to be playing throughout the year, unless it's on a first down at the 20-yard line, where then you're going to see probably a 4-3-4 or a 3-4-4-4. So, yeah, what I like is now you're going to get your 5 best defensive backs on the field in a creative situation, which is going to be Howard, McCain, Fitzpatrick, Rashad Jones, and TJ McDonald. And then when you put a 6th guy out there, that's where it gets a little bit interesting because Eric Rowe right now is that other boundary cornerback. And we should also see Walt Aikens make the team as the 7th defensive back, not because of his defensive back work, but because he is one of the best special teamers in the league. Reports out of camp, no surprise, is that Danny Crossman has immediately taken a liking to Walt Aikens, and when the special teams unit is out there, Walt Aikens is out there too. So we should see him making the roster as well. After that, after those first 7 guys, Paul, which are Howard, Minkah, McCain, Jones, McDonald, Rowe, and Aikens, who in your mind is the favorite to be the 8th and 9th defensive back on the roster, which we know the Dolphins are going to carry?
Well, I mean, they signed Patman this week, and I think he's got a chance. But I also think Maurice Smith has shown a little bit too much special ability in flashes that I think that he's a guy that we could see Flores and company get enamored with at some point in time. So I think he's got a chance. One guy that I don't think has a good chance here, and I didn't think it coming into the preseason, I didn't think it coming into the offseason, that he had a good chance anyway, but I think the fact that he's also hurt now has hurt his chances even further, and that's Cordrea Tankersley. He's a guy that had an abysmal year last year before getting hurt, and he's walking into training camp under a new head coach with a bad pass record, and now he's not participating. So take that for what you will, but that's not exactly an ideal scenario to be in, especially at a position group that's as deep and flexible as this Dolphins one is right now.
Yeah, I think Tankersley has an uphill climb. It's really an enigma with the guy where, at the end of his rookie year, especially being a third round draft pick, I thought that this guy was going to be a 10-year starter for the Dolphins, a cornerback, and he just fell off the face of the earth. I mean, he just had a terrible training camp last year, and that was not Adam Gase's fault. And then in the preseason, he looked lost. Then he gets into the season, he's not active. He tears his ACL, and now this year he comes in under the new coaching staff. He's already on PUP. I also don't see him making the roster. Hopefully he turns it around, but I think it's more of a mental thing with him than anything else. But looking at who I think are the next three who have the best chance to make the roster. Cornell Armstrong was a 6th-round pick last year, and he also started to become a staple in special teams last year. And early in camp, when Walt Aikens is out there, Cornell Armstrong is usually out there too. So I think he is the 8th guy that is going to make this Dolphins roster as we sit here today. 9th guy, I hope Jalen Davis does too, because he showed that ability when he got in last year, finally against the Bills. He should have got in earlier, but in 15 snaps, he had a pass breakup, a sack, and a forced fumble on 15 snaps. Can't get much better than that. So I'm certainly rooting for him as well. So Cornell Armstrong and Jalen Davis, Paul, do you have them making your Dolphins 53?
I do, and I'm kind of tweaking my 53 right now in my head on a daily basis, especially given the fact that Miami truly is deploying the defensive backs the way that we thought and expected. The fact that you count Walt Aikens as a defensive back, even though he truly is not. They very well could be in a scenario where we see them keep 10 or 11 players. Another guy to keep an eye on here as well, who's been getting a lot of reps, including with the first team, depending on the packages, is Jamal Wills. So he's another guy to keep an eye on here that I think has a very good chance of making the roster because the coaching staff seems pretty high on him at this point in time.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned him because word out of camp is that when the Dolphins go into that 6 defensive back look, then when they get 6 or 7 defensive backs on the field, Jamal Wilts is that guy after those locks that we mentioned. So he is the 7th defensive back that's coming off the bench right now. He's actually subbing with Eric Rowe, with Rowe getting most of the snaps when the Dolphins go into 6 defensive backs. So he seems to have a leg up right now in the rest of the team. Whether that's because of ability or experience in the system remains to be seen. And if it is, it's really a challenge to the rest of the guys here, like the Cornell Armstrongs and the Jalen Davises and the Patmans. And they also signed a guy named David Rivers, too, who's bounced around with a couple of teams. So it's going to be an interesting situation there at defensive back. And I'm also with you on that, too, Paul, with Maurice Smith. I think he is somebody, it was borderline criminal that this guy has not gotten on not only on the field, but on the active roster over the last couple of years. Every time he got on the field in preseason, I thought he looked the part. I thought he played very well, but he never got that opportunity. My only fear with Maurice Smith is that there's a possibility here that he gets crunched out because between Mccain, Rashad Jones, TJ McDonald, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Walt Aikens. I mean, you've got 5 possible safeties right there. But I do hope that they keep Smith here and just say, hey, he's one of the best 53 on the team at least, and might be one of the best 40.
Completely. And 2 other guys to keep an eye on. I do think there's an outside chance one of them makes it, or 2 of the young players there, Montre Hardage and Nick Needham. 2 guys we talked extensively about in our undrafted free agent show. And really, they're 2 guys that showed a lot of special in college. And I wouldn't be shocked if one of the 2 makes the roster as a developmental prospect if push comes to shove.
Yeah, Hardage and Needham have had a couple of interceptions, so they're making the most out of their opportunity. Look like practice squad guys. Wouldn't surprise me if they stashed him on the bottom of their roster too. I mean, these were players that, we talked about in our undrafted free agent show. Pro Football Focus had them as top 200 players coming into the NFL draft. and they would have been draftable players, no doubt about it, if they didn't post poor workout numbers. But those workout numbers in man-to-man defense don't seem to matter as much because, if they can get up on the line and get that jam and show more athleticism than they tested, could end up being players that make the roster or at least get on that practice squad. So we've run through a lot of players here, Paul. And one player we haven't mentioned is Chris Lammons. I think he's the last guy. He's the one guy who was just kind of there. He was on the practice squad last year. Travis Wingfield said that he's really gluing himself to special teams coach Danny Crossman, so he knows his way to the NFL or the Dolphins 53-man roster, but not a whole heck of a big shot with him making the squad. So I'll put you on the spot, Paul. Defensive back. Who are the players that you have overall making the roster?
Well, I mean, we've already gone through our 7 locks. On top of that, I've got Hardage making the roster. I got Needham going to the practice squad. I've got Jamal Wilts. I'm going to go Maurice Smith here and Cornell Armstrong and Jalen Davis. And that's a big posse in that secondary. But, again, they're using a lot of 6 defensive back looks, and they need bodies to be able to fill those roles.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got 12 defensive backs there. I've got 11, and that's not uncommon in the NFL today, especially with how many times the Dolphins are expecting to deploy six and maybe even 7 defensive backs on the field at a time. So, yeah, I've got the 7 locks as well, but I am hoping Eric Rowe gets pushed off this roster because that would have meant that like a Cordrea Tankersley or a Tyler Patman really stepped up. And these are players that I'm hoping do. So I've got Xavier Howard. I've got the 7 locks that we talked about. We don't have to go through them again. I've also got Cornell Armstrong as my 8th guy. Jalen Davis as my 9th. And to round out the 10th and 11th guys, we're going to go with Maurice Smith and the undrafted free agent Nick Needham as the final guy. Jamal Wilts, right now, it looks like he's on the inside looking out. But I think as the preseason games begin here, they're going to go with a little bit more upside at the defensive back spot. So that's my 11 guys. You have your 12. A couple of players to look out for on the chopping block coming out from the Patriots. Don't be surprised if you see some bigger names like Obi Melifonwu and Jonathan Jones and former second-round pick Duke Dawson be on the chopping block. And if that happens, Paul, the Dolphins and Brian Flores may want to pounce on that opportunity.
I completely agree. And you know what a fan I am of Melifonwu. You know we've had him here on the show leading up to the draft when he went to the Raiders. He is such a freak athlete that I struggle to think Flores wouldn't be able to find a role for him, especially given that he's got a little bit of familiarity already.
Yeah, I mean, a player that was 6'4", 220 coming out of college. And, yeah, he had injuries and he had problems with the Raiders, but got on the Patriots last year and not only made his way on the team, but started playing some meaningful snaps a little bit late in the season and throughout the playoffs too. So not everybody can make the team there with New England, so it wouldn't surprise me if he got cut and the Dolphins took a look there. So that will do it for our breakdown of the defensive back position. You can follow Paul and I on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and on Spotify. Be sure to check us out and tell your friends. And check out our merch store, too. We've got a lot of great stuff there on the FinSide.threadless.com. And if it's not on the right side and it's not on the left side, it is on the FinSide. Solo D, take us home.
It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the FinSide. It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the FinSide. Listen, Dolphins fans across the land all tuning in to see what